guests, Ronia Khalek, a U.S. citizen of Lebanese descent, host of Dispatches on Breakthrough News, and she's going to talk about what's happening in Lebanon, what to make of all of this. And we also have Adnan, who is our new DC coordinator for Code Pink. So he's been on the Hill a lot, and he's going to talk about Bernie Sanders, Senator Welch, also of Vermont, and Senator Merkley of Oregon, introducing joint resolutions of disapproval to try to block whatever is left of President Biden's shipment of $20 billion worth of weapons for Israel's genocide in Gaza, for its attacks, its invasion of Lebanon, etc., and Yemen. You know, this is now a regional war, and so it's imperative that we be organized and take action, and that's what we're going to talk about later tonight. We're going to call Capitol Hill, as we often do, in support of this joint resolution of disapproval. And we also have some petitions that Grace Siegelman, who's navigating the tech for us tonight, will be posting in the chat. So take care and watch that. All right, now, in terms of our norms, I don't think we've had a problem necessarily in the past, but it's always good to remind everybody that we always want to show respect, right? So mean what you say, but don't be mean, and disagree agreeably and that sort of thing. We just won't tolerate any disrespect on this program. Okay, so now let's go to Medea with, well, first, let me just say, we know what's happening in terms of anybody who's watching the news knows that there is right now the Biden administration sending all these weapons. We have 43,000 troops in the Middle East. They just sent thousands more. Clearly, they said, fine, Israel, go invade Lebanon. And now we see Iran responding in retaliation for the murder of Revolutionary Guards, leaders of Hezbollah in Lebanon, retaliating with 200 ballistic missiles sent into Israel, targeted, from what I'm reading, at military installations. All right, so with that, we're going to turn to Medea for an update on what Code Pink has been up to.
Yeah, so just a little bit more on the Iran scene. It is extremely dangerous that the Israelis have been egging Iran on and would love to pull the U.S. into a war with Iran. The Iranian response for the killing of some of those leaders that happened today, what we've heard is that one person was killed, an Israeli of Palestinian descent. It seems that Iran, just like in April, retaliates, but not trying to kill people. It's trying to attack military bases. And yet Jake Sullivan of the National Security Council said that this was an escalation, that it was that there would be retaliation. The Israelis said that there would be retaliation. So we don't know. Behind the scenes, we've been hearing very different things about differences in the White House and the National Security Council and the Pentagon, who wants to use this as an opportunity to join with Israel in really attacking Iran, and who wants to try to stop that from happening. We don't know all the different sides in this, but what we do know is how dangerous it is, and how we, the American people, do not want a war with Iran, just like Iran does not want a war either with Israel or with the United States. Going from that bigger picture down to the small picture of what Code Pink has been doing in these last 2 weeks in Congress, we mentioned to you 2 weeks ago about the killing of Aisha Noregzi from the Seattle area, who was shot by a sniper in the West Bank, and how we were going to push for an independent investigation into her murder. And we finally got her representative, Adam Smith, who is a very middle-of-the-road, moderate, but powerful because of his position on the Armed Services Committee, to write a very good letter. And with the help of many of you on this call and many people in her district and a coalition of groups and the people who've been going around with us in Congress every single day, we managed to get an amazing 103 signers onto that letter. Many of you would say, well, why wouldn't a U.S. congressperson call for an investigation into the murder of American citizen? But you have to realize that this is basically saying Israel is incapable and unwilling to do its own investigation. So for many, it was a leap. But because of all that pressure, getting 103 is very significant, including 10 members of the Senate. And many of the people who signed or people who haven't signed anything that would call for some kind of accountability from Israel at all. So in this sense, the letter itself moved the needle a little bit, and we wanted to thank all of you who helped us to get some of your members to sign onto that.
Yes, and I said, shout out in the chat, shout out to Don Smith of the state of Washington for his work on this effort. Okay, now it's time to introduce our first guest. It's such a pleasure and an honor to have with us Ronia Khalek. She is the host. Khalek, excuse me. She is the host of Dispatches at Breakthrough News. Fabulous show. She is of Lebanese descent. Lots of family and friends in Lebanon, has lived there for the past 7 years, though she's in the United States right now. She is a political activist, a journalist. Her work has appeared in Common Dreams, Salon, The Nation, In These Times, Citizen Radio, Alternate, Truth Out, and on and on. So welcome to CODEPINK Congress. Rania, if you could tell us perhaps what you think we need to understand about Lebanon as we go forward.
Yeah, I really appreciate you all inviting me on and giving me the opportunity to talk about this. Yes, I am Lebanese American, and I live in Lebanon. I just happen to be in the States right now. I came to cover the UN General Assembly for Breakthrough News, and the last couple of weeks have been just completely devastating, as I'm sure any of you who've been watching have seen. So over the last year, since the genocide in Gaza began, Israel has terrorized the people of Lebanon psychologically by repeatedly threatening to turn Lebanon into Gaza. Because on October 8th, Hezbollah, and I'll get into what Hezbollah exactly is, but Hezbollah's a Lebanese resistance group, started firing at Israeli military installations in solidarity with the people of Gaza in an attempt to pressure Israel to stop its genocide. And since then, there's been a kind of tit for tat between the Israelis and Hezbollah that has encroached deeper and deeper into each side's borders, and kind of exploded over the last couple of weeks into a larger scale war. And before I get into what happened over the last couple of weeks, I just want to also note that the first time Hezbollah fired at military installations on October 8th, they didn't actually even fire into Israel. They fired at an area called the Shabaa Farms, which is a Lebanese a territory that is under Israeli occupation. So they fired at, and they specifically fired at Israeli military. And since then, there's been a tit for tat between the two sides. However, 80% of the cross-border fire before the last couple of weeks had come from the Israeli side into Lebanon. Hezbollah has repeatedly been hitting Israeli military installations in Israel's north, while Israel has been also attacking Hezbollah military installations in addition to intentionally targeting journalists, killing a few as well. And they've also been targeting civilians every so often and illegally been using white phosphorus to destroy Lebanese farmland in that time period. And just to give you a little idea of what Hezbollah exactly is, because I know there's a little bit of confusion. People do understand Palestine quite well. They've learned a lot over the last year about this place that's under Israeli occupation and the 76 years of suffering that Palestinians have had to endure. But Israel, in its history, in its existence, has repeatedly also bombed, invaded, and occupied Lebanon. And in the 1980s, Israel invaded, again, it wasn't the first time, during the Lebanese Civil War, where the US and Israel were also funding fascist militias. The Israelis actually invaded Lebanon in 1982, an invasion that was so horrific, and they placed a siege on Beirut that was so horrific. The president at the time, Ronald Reagan, referred to it as a Holocaust. And that's Ronald Reagan talking, one of the most right-wing presidents we've ever had. And out of that, out of those massacres and that vicious invasion and occupation they merged this group called Hezbollah, which is just Lebanese people who came together, organized themselves to fight back against the Israelis with arms. And they did that. They did so for, over 15 years. And then in the year 2000, Hezbollah actually managed to liberate Lebanese land and kick out the Israeli occupiers. It was the first time that had ever happened where Arabs were able to liberate their land from Israel. Israel tried to invade and occupy Lebanon again in 2006. And once again, Hezbollah responded and pushed the Israelis out. It was also seen as another victory. And for the last 18 years, since 2006, Hezbollah's existence as an armed group in Lebanon to protect Lebanese territorial integrity has basically managed to keep the Israelis out until now. And now we see, and I just want to point out, Hezbollah also has a political wing. It has members of parliament. They were elected to parliament democratically, repeatedly over the last couple of decades. Our last elections in Lebanon were in 2022, where Hezbollah won like 13 seats, and it's a part of the largest political bloc in parliament. So not only is Israel and the United States attacking an armed non-state actor in Lebanon, it's attacking people who are a part of a recognized political party in Lebanon that the Lebanese people did in fact elect. So moving on to what happened over the last couple of weeks, after these cross-border attacks where Hezbollah has repeatedly intervened to try to stop the genocide in Gaza, and the late Hassan Nasrallah, who was in charge of Hezbollah until Israel assassinated him last week, repeatedly said in speech after speech, he was very clear, we will hold our fire. We will stop firing at Israeli military installations in Israel's north only when Israel stops its genocide in Gaza. So repeatedly, the Israelis and the U.S. have said, no, they prefer to continue their genocide. And that's why you have groups like Hezbollah and the Yemenis trying to intervene to stop it when the rest of the world isn't doing anything. Fast forward to the last couple of weeks, and the Israelis, with the backing of certain officials in the American government, we now know it was mostly spearheaded by Brett McGurk, who's Biden's special Middle East envoy, as well as Amos Hochstein, who's I think he used to be Israeli. He's definitely served in the Israeli military, but he's an advisor to U.S. President Joe Biden. These two figures helped spearhead the U.S. support for Israel, turning its attention from its genocide in Gaza to its northern border to go after Hezbollah. The U.S., which is basically just a neocon government at this point, has decided that now is the time to try to take out all of their enemies in the region, starting with, Hezbollah. They think Hamas is defeated. So you saw the pager attacks, which was a form of terrorism. You saw the walkie-talkie attacks, which was a form of terrorism. You saw Israel flattening entire residential apartment buildings in Dahiyeh, the southern suburb of Beirut, where Hezbollah has a lot of support. And you just saw it escalate and escalate. Then Israel carpet bombed Lebanon, killing over 500 people in a single day last Monday. And then you saw what happened late last week when Israel dropped 85 bombs, including U.S. supplied 2,000-pound bunker buster bombs to take out 6 apartment buildings to kill Hezbollah's leader, Hassan Nasrallah, which was a massive act of aggression. 1 million war crimes took place with that bombing alone. And you saw the most disgusting thing imaginable, which was Joe Biden and Kamala Harris both released statements calling that a form of justice when it annihilated the lives of probably hundreds of people. We still don't even know how many people were killed in that strike because so many people just were evaporated by these bombs that you can't even collect bodies. And the attacks on Lebanon have continued. Even just now, before I started talking to you, I saw there was a 5th evacuation order in the middle of the night in Dahiyeh, in the southern suburb of Beirut, given to people by the Israelis to evacuate residential apartment buildings so that the Israelis can bomb them. So, just imagine, I know all of you are opposed to war, but just imagine the barbarity of getting evacuation orders in your own home at 3 a.m. in the morning. Hopefully you wake up and see it. I don't even know where you're supposed to see it. And you leave your house and the Israelis just get to destroy it and you lose everything you've worked for your entire life. That is, if you're able to escape with your life. That is the situation in Lebanon every single day, every single night. We are seeing the scenes of Gaza replay in Lebanon. 1 million people have been displaced in the last couple. I mean, almost 2,000 people have been killed. We're looking at 50 to 100 people in Lebanon being slaughtered every single day, entire families in their homes. It's just, completely devastating. And personally, for me, I obviously, all of us have been heartbroken over Gaza over the last year, and I've cried many times, but there's just something so much more visceral about watching this happen to your own home and your own friends and your own family. And I'm just horrified. I'm completely horrified. And also now Lebanon's being invaded by the Israelis. The Israelis are trying to, they're just completely psychotic, and they're high, they're drunk on this false sense of victory because they killed Hassan Nasrallah, because they've murdered probably at this point hundreds of thousands of people in Gaza. We don't even know the actual death toll. And now they want to go after Iran. They've been going after Iran. They want to get the U.S. to also fight a war with Iran with them. And what's really frightening is that you see U.S. officials speaking the way that Condoleezza Rice was speaking about the Middle East back in 2006, when she called the Israeli war on Lebanon the birth pangs of a new Middle East. You hear officials in the Biden administration talking about using this as an opportunity to reshape the Middle East. We are on the brink of war right now after Iran retaliated. Finally, it's surprising it honestly took Iran this long. But Iran did retaliate and hit military installations. I'll remind you, Israel's slaughtering civilians intentionally while their adversaries are directly targeting Israeli military installations in defense of their people and the sovereignty of the region. And we are on the brink, on the precipice of a disastrous war right now that all the U.S. and Israel have to do is stop the genocide in Gaza. That's it. That's it. Just stop the genocide in Gaza. Stop the genocide in Gaza. The Yemenis will stop firing. Hezbollah will stop firing. Iran, has barely been firing, but now they have to demonstrate their capabilities for deterrent effect. If the U.S. would just get Israel to stop, if the U.S. would stop genocide in Gaza, all of this would stop. And instead, what we're seeing is these sociopathic monsters who are more depraved than I think U.S. imperialism has ever been in its history, wanting to drag this entire region into apocalypse.
Thank you, Rania. Yes, we are watching, all of us are watching this in horror, and it is reminiscent of George Bush's war on terror that resulted in the deaths of about 4.5 million people. So this is what we're up against, and we really need to be organized and in the street and challenging this every which way. I know that there have been a lot of people out in the street demanding an arms embargo. We've seen protests, we've seen encampments. We saw Stop the Arms to Israel at the DNC, at the convention. Your thoughts on activism going forward, Rania?
Listen, what Code Pink is doing is so incredibly important. I know Medea is doing God's work, going to Congress every day and just getting in the face of members of Congress and reminding them that the American people don't support this. And, I think that's what's so different now than during the war on terror times, because after 9/11, the U.S. basically had a mandate from the U.S. population, as well as a lot of the world, to just go on a killing spree. That's not the situation we're in today. The situation we're in is that the majority of the American public supports a ceasefire. An increasing number of Americans, for the first time ever, support cutting off weapons to Israel. People are horrified by what they're seeing on their screens. And so I think what's crucial right now, because I visit the States every 3 to 4 months. And what I notice is people here are horrified, the ones who are seeing it on their screens, which is a lot of people. They're seeing the live stream genocide on their screens. They're now seeing what's happening in Lebanon, but they feel helpless. They feel powerless. They're isolated. The U.S. is such an isolating place. You go to work, you come home, and you're just kind of bombarded with mainstream media lies. And then you take your phone out and you see the opposite of what CNN is showing you. And it makes people feel crazy. So I think what's crucial is to get people, as many people as possible, to keep doing what you guys are doing, to keep coming out, because I notice one thing that's so important is having a sense of community in this moment. Having a sense of being surrounded by people who agree with you, who are as horrified as you are, and actually feeling like you're part of some sort of collective that can actually organize and take action. Because people get in a defeatist mentality when they're kind of at home by themselves and they don't really know what to do. So I think what you guys are doing is so crucial. And it's just like, we need to up it, right? We need to do it more. There needs to be more organizing, more in the streets, and getting more of those people who feel alienated to come to the events that organizations like CODEPINK are hosting, to come to the protests, so that they don't feel like they're alone in this.
That is so important. And I know October 5th, a lot of people will be marching in the street and holding banners. I know where I live near Ventura and Los Angeles, there'll be a lot of people in the street. And I think that you're absolutely spot on in saying that we need to turn up the volume, not just give up, because wars are very hard to end, but they do end. And we saw what happened in Vietnam. We saw what happened with Iraq. Medea, question?
Well, one, I want to say that thanks to you, Rania, we have over 1,000 people listening, whether it's on this Zoom or on the YouTube or Twitter. And these people, Rania, are activists. In fact, the reason for these calls is to take action at the end. So we are excited about your presence, and thank you for your time. Some people are asking, is there a Lebanese army, and where are they, and why don't they do anything to protect the people?
That's a fantastic question. So Lebanon does have an army, the Lebanese Army, but it is funded and armed by the US. The US does not, I mean, it gives it hand-me-downs, like hand-me-down guns, hand-me-down armored personnel carriers, and a couple hand-me-down helicopters. And actually, the U.S. acts as an obstacle. It actually intervenes in Lebanese politics to prevent Lebanon from purchasing weapons from any other country. The U.S. has actually stepped in and prevented the Lebanese government at times from purchasing weapons from the Russians. WikiLeaks cables showed that. So the Lebanese army is basically kind of just like a jobs program for people to, hold guns and police traffic, which is really unfortunate, because in a situation like this, what you saw yesterday, if you all were if you were following the news as closely as I was, because I'm just kind of glued to the news right now, the Lebanese army, as the Israelis were announcing that they are going to invade, the Lebanese army withdrew from areas of the south that it's in, because it doesn't have the capacity to fight Israel, and that is not its mandate. That is why Hezbollah exists. I mean, there's all this talk about we have to disarm Hezbollah. Hezbollah's weapons are what threaten Lebanon, and Lebanon should have its own army. Lebanon should have its own army. The problem is its sovereignty is violated by the U.S. on behalf of Israel to prevent Lebanon from having a functioning army that can protect it. And that is why Hezbollah, made up of Lebanese people from the south, from the area of Lebanon that is under threat of constant invasion and occupation by the Israelis, they have taken it upon themselves to take up arms and align themselves with countries like Iran, who will supply them with weapons to defend their land and their homes from Israel. It's as simple as that. It's not that difficult to understand. We would all do the same thing if we were living in a threatening environment where somebody was trying to invade our land and steal our homes and kill our families. So that's the problem with the Lebanese army, is that it's prevented by the U.S. from actually doing what an army of a country does, which is defend it.
Rania, I'd like to ask you about countries in the Middle East that are complicit. Of course, the United States is the most complicit. I never say Israeli genocide. I say U.S. Israel genocide. Let's call out the U.S. every opportunity that we can. In terms of the other countries, we now know that the Saudis are saying we're not going to normalize relations as we intended to before October 7th until the Israelis recognize a Palestinian state and withdraw from the occupied territories. We also know, however, that there are countries like Qatar, not sure how you say it, that host military bases for the United States and are very much complicit as well. Your thoughts on other countries in the Middle East and the reaction of the rulers, the government, to the street?
Well, so you have the Gulf monarchies that are all aligned with the U.S., and many of them, like you said, host American military bases, like Qatar, which I think hosts like the Fifth Fleet of the U.S. The UAE has very close military ties with the U.S., the Bahrainis, the Saudis. These countries are all, in a way, client states of the U.S., but they're also very self-interested, rich monarchies that just want stabilities in their countries. They don't really care. They don't care about Palestine. They want regional stability, and that's what maybe works in Palestine's interest to some degree. But at the end of the day, the reason Saudi Arabia has basically turned on the idea of normalization for now is not because they care about Palestine, the rulers there, but because the people of Saudi Arabia care about Palestine. And that's the thing in these countries, except for maybe the UAE, the people of these countries do care about Palestine. And that's why these monarchies are sort of prevented from doing what they would love to do, which is just do what the UAE did, which is to normalize with the Abraham Accords. But these aren't the only countries in the Middle East, right? These are just like rich sort of mafia families that, you know, have a lot of oil wealth and were kind of created by the British, and they enjoy stability because of their willingness to work with the U.S. to shape the region in the form of U.S. interests. But then you have other countries, such as Iran, right? Iran had a revolution in 1979 that overthrew the U.S. The U.S. installed Shah, and since then, Iran has worked to try to protect its sovereignty and to also partner with movements around the region that are also trying to, you know, fight for their sovereignty, whether we're talking about Hamas or Hezbollah or Ansar Allah in Yemen, more widely known in the U.S. as the Houthis. And so these movements and countries, and there's resistance organizations in Iraq as well as the Syrian government. So this is what's called the axis of resistance in the region that Iran is sort of like at the helm of. And these groups are the ones that are helping Palestine in terms of sending weapons or actually intervening, like what you see the Houthis doing. The Houthis have tried to inflict material consequences on the Israelis by preventing ships in the Red Sea from getting to Israel. And they've also fired at Israel a few times. And you saw the same thing with the Iraqis. And this is why this threatens the idea. This is why we see the idea of all-out regional war becoming a bigger threat, because it pits the U.S. and the Israelis against the axis of the so-called axis of resistance that I just described. And so we could see a situation, if this escalates more, where you have Iran and Israel more regularly firing on each other, which I think is probably what's likely to happen. On top of that, you'll probably see the U.S. bombing Yemen more. And we remember, you know, you guys, CODEPINK, worked very hard to try to get resolutions in Congress passed to stop the war on Yemen. So Yemen has been through so much already, and they are sacrificing and risking so much to intervene against genocide in Gaza. And, you know, we saw Israel bomb the port of Hodeidah just a couple of days ago. Yemenis fired at Israel the next day. So they are committed to continuing that fight to stop this genocide. So you could probably see a likelihood of the U.S. bombing Yemen again. Likely the U.S. will start bombing parts of Iraq because there's Iraqi resistance groups that are promising that if anyone fires back at Iran, which will probably happen, they're going to fire harder at U.S. bases in Iraq, which they've been demanding leave anyways. I don't know what the hell the U.S. is still doing in Iraq. So you'll probably see the U.S. bombing Iraq again. You'll see the U.S. bombing parts of Syria again and more frequently because there's groups in Syria that have been hitting U.S. bases. And again, what the hell is the U.S. doing in Syria? Another sovereign country that didn't invite the U.S. there, but the U.S. is occupying Syria's oil fields, as Donald Trump said, to steal the oil. So you see all of these sort of like localized conflicts playing out in a bigger way that, like I said, could blow up into like some sort of apocalypse.
So we have some great questions. One is about the non-Shia population, and you know the U.S. for a long time has been trying to create more of a rift between Shia and Sunni. And they also ask about the non-Muslim population. How much support is there for Hezbollah? And just one other question is, what do you think that this land invasion is going to look like?
Those are great questions. And, you know, Lebanon can seem like a complicated place, but basically Lebanon is a colonial construct. You know, the French and the British came in and drew a bunch of porters, and Lebanon was supposed to be this sort of like Christian country in the way that Israel was supposed to be a Jewish country, right? Because Lebanon does have a pretty significant Christian population. It also has a lot of Sunnis. It has a minority of Druze, and then it's of course got Shias, who were mostly based in the south. And so there is a sectarian dynamic to this. The war on Lebanon right now by the Israelis is mostly a war on Shia areas. That's not to say they haven't attacked Sunni areas. They've bombed Saida, which is a largely Sunni city, and they've killed civilians there. They've also bombed a part of Beirut that's majority Sunni, killing a few PFLP leaders. I don't even know why. PFLP hasn't really been active in a militant way in Lebanon at all, especially since October. But But that said, this is mostly a war on the people of the South and the areas of South Beirut that the Israelis see as supporting Hezbollah. And these are mostly Shias who are like fleeing the displacement as majority Shias. And the fact that they're being displaced into other areas could, of course, cause some sectarian tensions. It already has a little bit. So the Shia population of Lebanon is quite supportive of Hezbollah for obvious reasons, because this is the land they're from, and Hezbollah is seen as their protector. As far as Christians go, I mean, they have other political parties. They have one large political party that's actually aligned with Hezbollah in government, the Free Patriotic Movement, that is pro-resistance. So I mean, I can't speak for everybody who supports the FPM, but probably a good chunk of people in the FBM are pro-resistance and probably support Hezbollah. And then you have a couple of right-wing Christian parties that are supported by the US in the form of the Lebanese forces and the Phalangists. These are the parties that massacred Palestinians in large numbers during the Lebanese Civil War. And they are proxies of the US. They were at one point, and maybe still are to some degree, proxies of the Saudis. They've been kind of silent. Their leaders, Samir Jaja and Sami Ismail, have been silent as far as I've seen since this has started. This is a place where people get nervous because in moments of chaos in Lebanon, the US tends to sort of crank up the support for the fascists. And so we might see some of that happen. We might see them taking advantage of what they see as an opportunity to foment civil unrest in Lebanon at a moment when Israel's invading. So that's something people are keeping an eye on. I can't predict how that's going to play out, but there's definitely among those that Christian population, there's very much an anti-Hezbollah sentiment. And maybe even perhaps, a large excitement that Hassan Nasrallah was killed and that this is happening to areas that support him, which is very sad. But, that's the reality of the situation. And then there's, of course, the Sunnis who, I mean, again, I can't speak for all of them, but there's sort of a power vacuum in the Sunni community in Lebanon because they don't really have a leader like they used to. And so, but at the moment, they're very supportive of the Palestinian cause. And if anything, I would say the last year of genocide against Palestinians in Gaza and Hezbollah's support and solidarity of them has made Hezbollah once again popular to some degree as a resistance group in that community, which I'm sure the US is quite concerned about. And I would say even across the entire region, despite spending billions of dollars the last, decade trying to foment anti-Sunni or anti-Shia sentiment across the region. So we'll have to see how that plays out. But for the most part, I will say I've been very proud of the Lebanese people and impressed by the unification around just being horrified by what's taking place in Lebanon. People are helping each other. They're helping house the displaced. They're helping cook for the displaced. They're helping find, blankets and mattresses for the displaced in their neighborhoods where there's like shelters available. And so that's been the common sentiment in Lebanon. And I really hope it stays that way.
Rania, thank you so much for joining us. We have a couple more questions.
I think we just had that question about the ground invasion.
Oh, yeah. Sorry. I forgot what the second question was. Okay, so what would a ground invasion look like? So far, what we've seen is these kinds of like short raids in and out, kind of dipping their toes in. I mean, they announced a ground invasion yesterday, but, we haven't actually seen a big ground invasion force take place yet. We've seen them sort of saying, oh, we destroyed a tunnel here and there. But for the most part, Hezbollah fighters are saying they haven't really seen Israeli soldiers come in. I wouldn't necessarily think that means that they're not going to do it, because if we see what the Israelis have done, they've moved about 80,000, I think, to 100,000 reservists up to the north. That includes special operations forces as well, who train in invasion and destroying tunnels and dealing with ambushes and that sort of thing. Israelis are viewed because of past combat that we've seen them participate in as not being very good at on the ground combat. We saw that they've really struggled in Gaza. They're really good at killing civilians. We know that they excel at that. They have superior air power. There's no question. But when it comes to ground invasion, they're still being, there's still really fierce firefights with Hamas in Gaza. And every time they think they got rid of Hamas in one place, Hamas pops up in another place. And that's after a year of genocide. Hezbollah is a much more powerful force than Hamas. It has larger numbers. It has larger weapons. Lebanon is their terrain. It's not a place that Israel occupies inch by inch the way it does Gaza, or knows necessarily inch by inch. It's mountainous. So that's to the benefit of the people who are from that land. And Hezbollah has been training. They have forces several different units that have been training. And, if you just, I don't know, who here follows Hassan Nasrallah's speeches, he's a really important figure. And when he speaks, the whole world does kind of stop to listen. So his last speech before he was killed, he did say, he invited it. He said, please go ahead, bring on the ground invasion. That's where you guys, that'll be your graveyard. And I tend to take that view because of what happened in 2006. Israel couldn't even take a hill in Lebanon in 2006. And like I said, Hezbollah is a much more powerful organization. That said, I think this is a bit of a different Israel. I think this is a more depraved Israel that's more consumed by hate and a desire for revenge than it's ever been in its history. And we've seen that play out in Gaza. So I just don't want to say, oh my God, they're going to do so terribly in southern Lebanon without also recognizing that they're going to do a lot of damage. And there is a chance, nothing's guaranteed. There is a chance Israel could reoccupy parts of southern Lebanon, create the buffer zone that they desire. They're saying this is going to be a short invasion, a short incursion. That's what they said about Rafah. So I wouldn't believe that. I think this is going to be a long war. And it's going to be devastating regardless, but the Israelis aren't going to achieve any of their military objectives.
Rania, you have in part answered this next question, but perhaps you can give us more of an assessment of the military wing of Hezbollah right now. Certainly the Israelis are celebrating all of these assassinations and their terrorism with the pagers and the walkie-talkies. You seem very confident that the Israelis will not be victorious with the ground invasion. What happens now with Hezbollah's military wing? What's your thinking? And how could this lapse occur, this intelligence lapse?
So it seems as if the fight in Syria really opened up Hezbollah to infiltration and spying and just Israel really being able to map out their military. In Lebanon, Hezbollah is its military wing is more insular. It's more protected because it's in the realm of just Lebanon. In Syria, they're working with the Syrians. They're working with the Russians. They're working with the Iranians. So it's just you're opening yourself up to a lot more groups and people that are also infiltrated. Israel also has different technology today than it did 20 years ago. There's a lot of technology that I don't quite understand, but I've read about it in terms of being able to track people using their devices and using satellites and to get intelligence, to follow people, something called predictive analysis, or where you can basically predict people's future movements, something I also don't quite understand. But and Israel has an entire unit that's been devoted to basically data mining anything coming out from anyone they understand to be a part of Hezbollah's military structure. There was a lot of trickery that went on over the past couple of months, or even the past year, where it seems as though the Israelis led Hezbollah to believe that they were in a tit for tat, that Hezbollah could kind of control, that there was a rules of engagement that everybody was following, while saying, okay, there's going to be a ceasefire. And ultimately, those were all lies from both the Americans and the Israelis. Nobody ever intended for there to be any sort of ceasefire. And the Israelis, when they decided to shift to the north, they sort of played a lot of their cards, which was knowing the movements of high-level senior Hezbollah leadership in the military side of things and taking them out, picking them off one by one, starting with Fuad Shukr at the end of July. And even the way they killed him, they intentionally seem to have killed him in his home with his family, which is something the Israelis love to do, to sort of make Hezbollah feel like they didn't know where the command and control was. I also want to point out, though, despite Israel's superior spycraft and intelligence technology, they also dropped 85 bombs on buildings. You could track Netanyahu to an apartment block, to a street, but you're not going to drop 85 bunker buster bombs on him. That doesn't take some high level of intelligence. That just takes a high level of inhumanity, and superior air power supplied by the United States. So I just also want to point that out, because I don't want to hold Israel up as this all-knowing, oh my God, they had an idea of Nasrallah somewhere within the vicinity of these 6 buildings, so we're going to create craters among all of them and hopefully kill him. And that's what happened. And it was a huge blow. I'm not going to pretend it wasn't. This was a huge blow to Hezbollah. They lost over the last few weeks, they've lost their entire senior military leadership. But this is also an organization that is built to replace people. And that is what's happening. And also, the people who are doing the actual fighting are still doing it because we see them still firing. Their capacity to hit back has definitely been degraded, but certainly not destroyed. And Hezbollah has underground weapons that Israel can't get to. Above ground weapons is a different story. It's estimated they destroyed something like 60% of the above ground weapons. Below ground is a completely different story. So this is definitely a degraded military organization, but it's one that has demonstrated in the last few days has managed to absorb these losses and is still managing to function, which I think speaks to their capabilities. And I'll also say, Israel is supported and armed by the most powerful empire in the history of the world, with all the advanced military technology at its disposal. Whereas its adversaries are all under sanction, and in some cases aren't even countries. They're non-state actors, like in the case of like Hezbollah, for example. So it's actually kind of a testament to Hezbollah's resolve that it is still standing right now and is still able to fire at Israel. So I think, we're definitely going to see over the next few days what it's still capable of. But it doesn't seem as though they've managed to destroy Hezbollah's military infrastructure so much in the south of Lebanon. Israel's not going to have a cakewalk walking into this country at all. They're going to face some fierce resistance.
Rania, Khalek, thank you so much for joining us. You are the host of Dispatches at Breakthrough News. Everybody tune in, watch her, listen to her. You have so much information to share, so much in terms of your analysis and insights that will benefit us as we go forward. So thank you for joining us, and everybody stay with us because we have a guest coming up.
Thank you so much, Rania. That was awesome.
Thank you so much for having me. Good luck, everyone. Keep up the fight.
Thank you, Rania. And now Medea is going
to
our next guest.
Well, Adnan Stumo is a DC coordinator. He is just come on with us recently, but already shown how brilliant he is. We call him our Renaissance man. You just came out of a martial arts training tonight, but last night it was the violin that you were playing at a music event for your mother who's running for Congress. He's also Ralph Nader's nephew and get a lot of the smarts in that family. And he's just been marvelous. So we're delighted to have you on tonight with us, Adnan.
Thank you so much for having me. Pleasure.
And you're going to talk about the Joint Resolution of Disapproval, right?
Yes. So last Wednesday, Bernie Sanders finally introduced 6 different joint resolutions of disapproval, ranging from munitions, joint direct attack munitions, to whole fighter planes. There are different time schedules for delivering these things. Obviously, the F-15s are by far the largest monetary amount in the total of 20 billion, coming to 18.82 billion. But those will not begin being delivered until 2029. The earliest ones with imminent delivery are the JDAMs, the Joint Direct Attack Munitions. Then we have 120 millimeter tank shells that are worth 774 million. We have high explosive rounds, mortar rounds, which are worth about 61 million, and then medium tactical vehicles. And then we've got the fighter aircraft and also upgrade kits for old F-15s that the Israelis already have. Now, we have a number of, well, before I get to the co-sponsors so far, I just want to say that Bernie really explicitly outlined in his press release and in his fact sheet the reason why he is going after these specific weapons transfers and weapons sales is that they are continuously being used in offensive operations against Gaza, West Bank, and now Lebanon. So he has gone through actually a number of very specific examples, which I'm just going to cite a few of them now because it's important when you are talking to friends who are uncertain how to deal with this topic, that you understand that a lot of these JDAMs and tank shells and mortar rounds have been found at massacre sites in Gaza. I mean, on October 31st, 2023, an Israeli strike with a US-made JDAM killed at least 126 civilians in Jabalia refugee camp, including 69 children. On July 13th of this year, an Israeli strike with a US-made JDAM in Al-Mawasi killed at least 90 Palestinians, at least half of whom were women and children, and injured more than 300. Now, in terms of the 120 millimeter tank rounds, on Hind Rajab was killed using a tank that was firing these rounds. The ambulance that came to rescue her was destroyed by one of these rounds. On May 28th of this year, the Israeli military used a 120 millimeter tank round in Al-Mawasi and an attack that killed 23 people, including 12 children. So these are very clear, demonstrable war crimes. Bernie, we all have different views on how good he's been on this issue. Certainly, he could not be described as an anti-Zionist, but we are very happy. This is a tool that we can use to fight back. For all of our volunteer squads on the Hill, we can get much more done when we are working with a specific piece of legislation or a specific letter, rather than just saying, stop arming Israel, ceasefire now. Staffers and Congress members do not respond as positively or as cogently when we're making general demands of them. So,
Adnan,
yes.
Thank you so much. So we're going to wrap it up, but I just wanted to make sure people understand that Congress is going on recess.
Yes.
And so this will be an opportunity to really press for co-sponsorship in the Senate, right? And that there will be a vote on this after the November election. But there will still, like you mentioned, there's still weapons that are being planned for shipment in 2029.
Indeed. So the most urgent are the JDAMs. That's probably also the easiest to get senators to sign on to co-sponsor. So the first step is getting as many co-sponsors as we can, which they will pledge to co-sponsor during recess at any time now. You can call them and urge them to do that. And I really hope that many people on this call follow through on that. You underestimate, when we're in Congress, we often hear from members, well, I haven't been hearing, do you have my constituents with you? You're from another state. Why do I care what you have to say? So you guys calling really makes a difference. And I don't want you to underestimate that.
Well, thank you so much. We're going to go to our calling party right now, Adnan. I know that you have a wealth of information. Maybe you can let people know how to reach you at CodePink if they have questions.
Yeah, most definitely. My email is just my first name, which you can see, I think, on my profile, adnan@codepink.org. You're welcome to reach out.
And maybe
Wonderful.
you can
Thank you
tell
so
us the
much.
senators that have already signed on to this.
Yes, we have Welch has signed on to, I believe, 4. Merkley has signed on to 5. And we have pledges verbally from Tim Kaine, Van Hollen, and Schatz, I believe, actually has signed on to 1. Which is probably the JDAMs, and that's the most important. So thank you all.
Well, Tim Kaine, I think he's on the Senate Armed Services, isn't he? He's on a few committees, very important committees. So yeah, let's make sure he hears from his constituents. Thank you so much, Adnan. Let's now all unmute and thank him for the work that